Foundations.
So what he's saying is don't make covenants, don't make promises, don't make vows, don't make rash decisions. Just say yes you will or no you won't. Marriage vows are a different thing. That is a sacred covenant of a man and a woman joining together before God.
Foundations. Understanding the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. With Robbo Robinson and Mandy Warby.
In our previous program, we looked at some examples of rash vows that were made in the Bible and the devastating consequences of those vows to God. In this program, we're going to look at the culture of Jesus' day and what his views were on the issue of Corban.
By the time Jesus had arrived, things at the temple and within the religious framework of the people of Israel, it had become pretty toxic by that time. And when you sort of, use the example of what the people of Israel had of vows in their own personal history, going back to, we mentioned Jephthah and Joshua in the previous program, they had examples. They already had these examples. And by that stage, the vows, or saying Corban, had become so religiously tight, there was a stranglehold on it because of the corruption of the religious leaders at that time. Now, when it comes to vows, we don't actually understand that kind of extremity. We live in a day and age where vows are not a very big deal at all. And of course, in our society, the most obvious vows are marriage vows. So now that marriage has been redefined, it can mean absolutely anything, which means the vows don't mean much either.
Yeah. Well, I guess for decades it hasn't meant much, has it? With easy, no-fault divorce, you can make a vow and then a couple of years later think, oh, well, I actually don't mean that anymore, so you walk away from it.
All you have to cite these days is irreconcilable differences and you're out. Easy peasy. It's so disposable. So we actually in our culture don't really understand the significance or the sacredness of making vows. However, when it comes to God's view of vows, they are sacred. They are extremely important. And I want to read again Numbers 30 verse 2 that says, if a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath to bind himself with a binding obligation, he shall not violate his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. So God says, if you make a vow, you better obey that. He also wrote into the law that if you make a rash vow, there will be a penalty that you have to pay, but you can get out of it because he doesn't want you to disobey his law or cause somebody to sin or do something wrong as a means of keeping a rash vow. So you can get out of it. Now, at the time that Jesus lived and ministered, as I said, the priesthood had become incredibly corrupt, and they had turned the temple into a money-making venture. They sold doves, they sold pigeons, they sold sheep and goats and other kinds of livestock, and they were making a matzah off it. And not only that, but they also had a currency exchange program, because if you had to come and, as every Jew had to pay the temple shekel, a temple tax every year, it was the same for everybody, or you wanted to buy your offerings and the rest of it, well, you couldn't come in and use Roman currency because it had an image of Caesar on it. You can't have a graven image. So you would have to come and exchange your Roman currency for the temple shekel. I might just add it actually had an image on it as well, but let's not split hairs. Apparently that was okay for them. But the currency exchange would then take place, and of course that came at a cost as well.
Yeah.
And so they were making a lot of money. It was mostly the sect of the Sadducees who were in the priesthood themselves. Of course, according to the law, it was supposed to be only the line of the family of Aaron from the tribe of Levi. That didn't matter by that stage. They were all corrupt. So they got the monopoly on the power. They set up this business within the temple and they were getting very rich. Another thing that they were doing was that anybody who made these vows of Corban, something that was going to be dedicated to God, they were of the opinion that it must be given to God and therefore, by default, given to them at the temple. Now, that's what a lot of people think, that everybody thought that way by that stage. No, because up until that point, there had been this long debate going on that we mentioned in the previous program, that the rabbis would argue, if somebody makes a really stupid vow, are they really obligated to keep it? And some were saying no, because you can't contravene God's word. Others were saying, well, they made a stupid vow, they've got to obey it, So this debate had been going on. But up to about 400 years before Christ, and you get to the days of Malachi, That's when God had last spoken to the people of Israel and said, "You're ripping me off." And he was actually directing his message to the priests. You're ripping me off in your offerings and tithes. It wasn't the people, it was the priests. 400 years later, they were as bad as they were back then. Jesus comes up and he's so cranky about what they've done to the temple.
Well, he said quite a few things, didn't he, during his time of ministry, directed to those, the priests and the leaders in the church or in the temple.
He was very vocal.
Was very direct with them, saying about that and talking about this issue of making a vow, but then contravening God's word in the process. But they felt it was okay.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I just want to read from Mark chapter 7. I won't read all of it, but it's verses 5 to 13 where the scribes come and they say to him, "Why don't your disciples walk according to the traditions of the elders, but they eat their bread with impure hands?" And then Jesus opened his mouth and he says, "Well, rightly did Isaiah talk about you, you're hypocrites, and you teaching the people to actually contravene God's word." He says, "This people honours me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." And then he goes on about, "You hold to the traditions of men, and you're experts at making people contravene God's commandments in order to uphold your traditions." And he actually said Moses said, "Honour your father and your mother, and he who speaks evil of father or mother is to be put to death." But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, "Whatever I have that would help you is Corban," that is to say, given to God, and you no longer permit him to do anything for his father and mother, thus invalidating God's word by your tradition, and you've made that you have handed down, and you do many such things as this. Now, the issue with parents was that you got to understand, there was no social security in those days, no old age pension, no aged care facilities. It was a cultural thing that when parents aged, their children would look after them and provide for their needs, as the parents did for the children. And in some cultures in the Middle East, that still happens today. That's the way it was supposed to be. And here they're saying, "Oh, no, you can leave your parents destitute. Just give that money that you were going to give it to God." That means give it to us. So therefore, they're actually telling the people, break God's commandments and give the money to us.
Yeah.
And that was the problem. So, during Jesus' earthly ministry, he had to deal with this kind of thing. What did he say about making promises or oaths or vows? He said this, Matthew 5:33 to 37. "You have heard what the ancients were told. You shall not make false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord. But I say to you," so in other words, he's saying, that's what they said, "I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it's the throne of God, or by the earth, for it's the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black, but let your statement be, yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond these is of evil." So what he's saying is, don't make covenants, don't make promises, don't make vows, don't make rash decisions. Just say, yes, you will, or no, you won't. Anything beyond that is evil. Of course, marriage vows are a different thing. That is a sacred covenant of a man and a woman joining together, becoming one flesh before God. But anything outside of the marriage covenant, no. I can remember being in a church conference setting probably 20 years ago. And, you get caught up in the excitement and the emotion of what you're hearing over several days. And from the platform, everybody was asked, make a covenant. Let's make a covenant together. And I can remember feeling at that point decidedly uncomfortable. Making a covenant lasts forever. And I can remember sitting there thinking, I can't do this. And just as well I didn't, because covenants are extremely important. My life has moved from that particular group. I now don't even live in the same state. I'm in a different place. And yet had I made that covenant, it would have bound me to keeping that covenant. We are not to make covenants, promises, vows to anybody other than our spouse and our relationship with God. Yes or no. And let's leave it at that.
Well, once again, something to chew on over the coming days with that challenge from Jesus regarding Corban. And as we often say, you can download the notes to read again and to study some more on this particular topic. You can go to vision.org.au/foundations to do that. Well, next time on the program, we're going to be learning about orphans.
This has been Foundations, a look at the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. For study notes, resources and more, see vision.org.au/foundations.